This is your World War III update. Here's what's going on. Gold is about to cross the $3,500 Rubicon, and that means that the system is fundamentally broken. This is not normal. Don't let anybody try to convince you that what we're seeing right now is normal. Even if it was somewhat of an anomaly that we could dismiss as being temporary and insignificant, the media would still be talking about it. Whether you own gold or not, understand that it's a barometer for social chaos. It means that the system is fundamentally broken and that the dollar that gold is measured in is going through the floor. Ask yourself why NBC, BBC, CBC, Fox News, ABC, PBS, why all of these mainstream media networks are not calling attention to the fact that the gold market cap of nearly $22 trillion, half of which has been added in the past year, we're seeing a 43% divergence from the S&P 500 in the last 3 months alone. That means that gold has outperformed the S&P by 43% in the last quarter, which is absolutely insane. Right now, what's catapulting gold over that $3,500 mark, and it might even happen tonight, is a concatenation of coalescing crises. How is that for alliteration? What we're seeing right now is the end result of years of living beyond our means. The world is heavily over-leveraged, not only in a monetary sense, in a cultural sense, and everything, like water, eventually settles at sea level. Everything becomes grounded in good enough time. What we've seen with COVID, I just got a friend who messaged me who said that somebody who's a VIP in Asia, who's in the know of intelligence as it pertains to global affairs with respect to China in particular, indicated that what we've seen with COVID was a trial balloon. It was a trial run. It was a stress test on the system. Think about what's happening right now with the global decoupling. Is it at all coincidental, if only incidental, that China is now fully prepared to be disconnected from the world? And so is the United States to a lesser degree. But China's economy is primed. People are preconditioned. They know what to do. Everybody has the script. They have a schema for understanding what's about to happen, thus softening the blow, priming them, preconditioning them for this inevitable reality that we currently face. Now, people are getting mad at me in the comment section more and more so for being alarmist, being sensational, being a fearmonger and all this stuff, yet they keep on coming back to these videos. And that's because they're in denial, okay? Is it Kohlberg's stages of grief and loss? 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Most people are still in denial, okay? You got a long way to go to get to acceptance if you're still in denial. I mean, look around, man. Everybody is on edge. And I mean, if I'm seeing it as the boss in the space that I work in, imagine what people in the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder are thinking. Now, I was once there, and I know that place very well. I was in a far less privileged position than I am now 15 years ago, and I can tell you that people are on edge because the money buys less and less, and it's only going to get worse. The sooner you accept that reality, the better off you're going to be. And a lot of people, I think, the anger is because they've realized that this is a new reality they have to face. And next up is going to be depression. So everybody who comes on the channel leaves the comment, haha, the sky is falling. Mark my words. I want you to remember this statement right now. You will be a prepper just like me someday. The fact that you came on this video in the first place, you know how I know that? Because I was you. I was that guy writing those comments on videos like this. And here we are. World War III. That's where we're at. And it's only going to intensify, okay? Understand that COVID was a stress test of the system. I just had a friend text me some intelligence that he acquired from a source in Asia who's very well connected, that confirms the hypothesis that COVID indeed was a stress test of the supply chain. And that what we're seeing right now, they prepared for, which is why they've been stockpiling to the rafters. People here are still in disbelief, and the media isn't even telling you the truth about how bad the situation is. Yet no matter how many times, time and time again, that we're vindicated in our prognostications, it doesn't matter how many times we're right. It seems like some people are still in disbelief, but I think it's the new people. I think we're getting a steady new stream of people in denial, right? Because who wants to admit that your worldview is crumbling and that you're going to have to adapt or die? And then you stack AI on top of that. And I mean, the future is uncertain, to say the least. That causes a lot of stress. Watch psychopharmaceutical prescriptions go through the roof, which of course is a bad thing because most of them are routed through China in some way, shape, or form, and India. And if that South China Sea goes up in flames, then all bets are off because people will have no ability to cope because we've been given these crutches, not just medical crutches, but cultural crutches. We're given Netflix and 50,000 frickin' shows and video games to distract ourselves with. Usually I don't go on the rhetorical cultural critique bend until later on in the video, but today there's just so much information. I got 10 pages of actual notes to go over. Where do I even begin? But that's where we're at fundamentally. The system is broken and people have had a learned helplessness of sorts. We've been desensitized and acclimatized to this new reality. The market was down 2.5% today, and it was crickets chirping. It was just like, just normal volatility. When you reach that level where that's normal, then you know that's the new normal, going downtown. So expect that things are going to continue to reach a fever pitch, but as preppers, if you're about this life, I mean, this is what we prepared for. We're not saying be scared. We're saying be prepared. The problem is, if you're not scared, you're not going to prepare. If there's nothing to fear, why prepare at all? And I'm not saying freak out, because you don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person who needs to be afraid of some imminent disaster to motivate you to self-preserve, because that's not a winning strategy in the long run. That is at the whim of your emotions, and you're not thinking clearly. You want to make these decisions when times are good. Now, relatively speaking, the supply chain's still up, the lights are still on, I'm still broadcasting on YouTube, so it's not all bad yet, but it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, and the frog is being boiled in water, and add any sort of metaphor that floats your boat. The avalanche, the final snowflake that tips it over the edge, all right? Retail investors are buying U.S. stocks at a record pace in the thick of all of this, okay? Retail investors, and it's so easy nowadays. Remember before I predicted this crash back in February when I said, yep, this is the week when it was all going to break, and it did? I told you that part of the problem is the speed of it all. Bank runs can happen instantaneously. Stock market, even gold, you can buy gold instantaneously online, which is worrisome to see that steady rise, even though I'm pretty sure that that is more reflective of how fundamentally broken the system is. Mom and pop investors bought a record amount of the NASDAQ 100 stocks last week, according to Goldman Sachs. All the while insiders are selling into this bear trap, okay? And as I indicated at the beginning of the video, gold has now diverged 42%. And a lot of that is just in Asia. We haven't even reached the fear of missing out phase in the West yet. I think when we do, and I'm not encouraging that, like right now I'm very reticent about gold at these levels, even though I know gold has infinite upside if the US dollar has infinite downside. I mean, depending on what you measure it in. We don't even know what gold is going to be measured in 10 years. That's something to think about, isn't it? Is it going to be measured in yuan, in euros? Some people think it's going to be measured in Bitcoin. Bitcoin went up a little bit because Michael Saylor woke up and bought another, I don't know, a couple $1 billion, and BlackRock bought some more. So everybody's like, that's where it's at. And, you know, I mean, to be fair, Bitcoin is holding that 80,000 line. Now, I have to wonder, how much of that is because the U.S. crypto reserve isn't selling theirs? How much is it because of how much has been lost over the years that will never be sold? I mean, how does that factor into the price? Anyways, the everything bubble is most definitely bursting. This is the first time since the onset of the global financial crisis that the S&P 500, the US dollar index, and the 10-year treasury yield, which is skyrocketing, are all down at this point in the year, down in the sense of up with the treasury yield. Probably fine, right? All three of these things down. Not since the financial crisis have we seen that. And Trump just called Jerome Powell a major loser because he's not lowering interest rates. Now, when you lower interest rates, you increase the amount of fractional reserve banking because people are more likely to get loans, and so more money is generated. So even if it's not direct QE and infusing money into the system directly, it still has the consequence of being inflationary. So Trump is mad because they're not going to hyperinflate the bubble more to appease all the crypto bros who are getting ready to, call the self-deletion hotlines. Trump also said, and they're leaving all these subtle hints. Do you notice that? It almost makes me think that whole Fort Knox thing, it does appear to have been a psyop. I mean, whatever came of that? And all the other promises to disclose all the deep state secrets, nothing, absolutely nothing. But Trump tweeted the other day, he who has the gold makes the rules, which is a very objectivist point of view. Basically says that the winners take all. The winners write history. There's no morality or ethics to it. That doesn't matter. We don't care about the iniquity of the policies that we have on other parts of the planet, like people who are currently suffering in the Gaza Strip. If you think you're suffering and you have the internet, be thankful you're not in a tent somewhere with one of your limbs blowing off and your entire family has basically been erased off the face of the map, and you don't know when your next meal is going to come. Just be thankful you're not that person, okay? It's Easter. We got to be thankful if you're of the Christian persuasion. The U.S., according to former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, that the U.S. is now likely, like 90% likely, heading towards a recession with a potential 2 million Americans put out of work. And remember, what's different this time is automation. Back in the 2008 recession, that was really in the peri phase of Chinese industrialization, when they were still really rising and they still seen that rapid growth, right, which made things cheaper and offset the conditions in the U.S. at the time with cheap products. Well, now we don't have that, and we also, if we do bring the jobs back, it's going to be through automation. So what does that mean? That means ration cards, or they're going to give it a fancy name like universal basic income. Don't worry, why be burdened owning your own vehicle or having the survival skill of knowing how to drive when you could have this cyber cab drive you around? We promise, we're not going to record your conversations and data and what you do in the car, and you won't own it, and you'll be happy as all hell. Gold is making record inflows, making history today with funds attracting $8 billion in net inflows in the last week, the most ever. Now, that's in nominal terms. Nonetheless, very significant. More than double the record seen during the 2020 crisis. And a lot of people think that we're just getting started, because if you look at the market value of gold as a percentage of foreign-held United States treasuries, right now we're still at like 10% or something, when historically in these bull runs it's went up to 160% at the peak in I believe it was the early 80s. So that means that for all the IOUs that the US has out there, they have a certain proportion of gold. And right now it's about 10% of what is out there. So if everybody wanted to exchange for gold. Not that they could, of course, because, Bretton Woods collapsed a long time ago. But nonetheless, what it signifies is that the system is highly over-leveraged, and it's all imploding. It's all imploding. The good thing is that it's happening at a slow enough pace because we're so convinced that these things are going to happen abruptly. And I remember Praxis Prepper made a video about how in Hollywood, even in pandemic movies, everybody thought that it was going to be relatively instantaneous, that you could officially demarcate when the collapse happens. I think the Doomsday Queen hinted at this today in one of her videos also, that these things are a process. They're not an event. You don't just wake up and the news is going to say it's an economic collapse. In fact, the news will never say that, right? They'll say that if it's politically instrumental, if it means destroying Donald Trump or, for some sort of political purpose. But they're never going to say it in a way that fundamentally compromises the established order in such a way that it's going to create a panic that is going to really, truly destabilize the system. Why? Because the people who benefit the most from the system run all the media agencies and the technopoly who allows you to transact information. So it's an impossibility to believe that you are ever going to be able to transcend that level of control, leveraging those same instruments of control. I mean, it's all monitored, it's tightly regulated, and you bring in the algorithms that control everything. They can manage the data autonomously. Forget about it. All you can do is prep, plant a garden. Really, that's all you can do. At this point in time, don't be the annoying family member who tries to convince everybody. Just start doing shit. And don't even bring it up. Just, one day, say, yeah, I'm starting a garden. Yeah, I'm taking up shooting. I'm, looking at precious metals. I'm looking at getting some chickens. And just do that. If you want to lead by example. And that's the only way you're ever going to convince somebody is by doing. Not be the guy that's, screaming like a chicken with his head cut off about chemtrails and, the world or Agenda 21 and blah, blah, blah. You're never going to, you're just going to seem like a crazy person. And if you want to convince people around you, you just got to start doing it. Don't do it in an overzealous manner that will be construed as a sign of mental illness, which it most certainly will. That's the best way to help people. Now, with respect to what happened over the weekend, with respect to Iran, let's talk about Iran first, then we will go around the map. I got 37% left on the clock. Okay, so there is Israeli intelligence right now suggesting that the Israelis are going to do a strike on Iran. Now, this all could just be posturing in an attempt to force a deal which will be in Israel's favor. But there's a certain inevitability to all this, that regardless of what Iran does, much like was the case with Saddam Hussein, it didn't matter that there were no weapons of mass destruction, recall. It didn't matter that there were people within the US government saying that this is untrue. They went and did it anyways. All they really need at this point is what I call a flashbulb event. Remember, a flashbulb memory takes place when you know where you were when it happened, right? I remember where I was when I heard that Trump got shot. I remember where I was when I heard about 9/11. I remember where I was for some reason why Princess Diana died in a tunnel. I think that was a big story at the time. It's a flashbulb memory. In order for you to have sufficient enough political capital to embark on a major interventionist policy like Iran, you need a major flashbulb event. Israel doesn't have that. They have October 7th, but that one's fizzled out. And of course, they burned a lot of that in their mismanagement of the Gaza crisis. So I think what we need to see first is for Israel to actually make a move. They want war. The war is coming. It is inevitable at this point in time. They need regime change in order to further their ends in the region. But I think something has to happen at this point in time, and you're seeing a lot of temporizing with Witkoff playing all the various parties, consulting with Russia and Iran and doing the shuttle diplomacy back and forth between the four, Israel, the United States, Russia, Iran. It's like he's just doing a loop. And I believe it's all just to buy time. Everybody knows it. All of the stars are perfectly aligned. All the equipment is there for an attack. You're never going to have a more hawkish administration when it comes to Iran. You're never going to have the mega like political capital that you do for a conflict in Iran. In fact, the bipartisan support is largely there for a war in Iran. Not so much Gaza, but in terms of Iran. So this is why CENTCOM Chief General Kurilla is visiting Israel in the coming days to ensure the U.S. and Israel are aligned on Iran. Ynet is reporting that Kurilla is also known as a strong supporter for attacking Tehran's nuclear program. Now, Ynet is heavily biased and the mouthpiece for the Israeli government, so take it with a grain of salt whether or not you believe that to be the case. The Israeli Air Force has intensified its prep for an Iran strike by independently, whether independent or jointly with the United States, by conducting drills and conducting a major exercise simulating missile and rocket attacks on its bases. So they're already getting ready for the retaliatory strike by the Iranians after they do their initial strike. Now, of course, this is exactly what they want. This is the flashbulb event they want. They want to provoke the Iranians in such a way that the Iranians have to respond. And if they don't respond, then it would only invite another attack. And once the Iranians attack, then the Israelis can say, there's the proof that the United States needs and the justification for the U.S. to get involved. And Donald Trump has not shown any indecision and ambivalence about supporting Israel should Iran be the one who is instigating the fight, or at least perceived to be, which of course they won't be because Israel will have struck first. Anyways, the Ayatollah, not the political class in Iran, but the Ayatollah himself, Ayatollah Khamenei, is very pessimistic about the possibility for these negotiations, despite all of the conciliatory messaging that we're hearing in the media. Regarding negotiations with the United States, he says, within certain limits and subject to compliance with national interests, we are ready for an agreement. But if they do not want to conclude a deal with us on equal terms, we will continue to go our own way. He noted, after the second round of talks with the U.S., he repeated the position voiced by the Iran's supreme leader, so this is the president who is echoing the supreme leader, Khamenei, that Tehran views the talks pessimistically and not with optimism. So we know that the Israelis are incredibly intransigent on the topic of Iranian nuclear energy, period, having a nuclear program at all. They want it completely dismantled. And Trump appears to be gunning for, which would just be a replay of the JCPOA, but arguably much worse, because they're talking about wanting all sanctions lifted. Now, the Russian deal, the defense pact with Iran, was ratified today. So that is officially now in motion. Interestingly, that was only made official after the second round of peaceful negotiations. Now, this doesn't have any Article 5-like clause that would necessitate Russia coming to the aid of Iran should they be attacked. In fact, this is a point that has been emphasized. However, they will perhaps contribute with Iran on other aspects of their military program, perhaps providing them with various forms of missile defense. But of course, this does not mean that Russia is even really in a position, material speaking, in terms of coming to their aid, because of course they have their own problems, which are only intensifying. And no, there wasn't an Easter ceasefire. That was more disinformation, but that time from the Russian side. There might have been a few generals on the front who pulled their punches, but by and large, the war raged on, and whatever lull and inactivity that we've seen over the weekend has been quickly made up for today, as there's been another major attack on Odessa, and the Ukraine recently, they targeted a base, a drone base inside, what was it? It was inside Russia proper. What is the oblast that is being contested? Kursk, inside Kursk. using Western missiles, cruise missiles, okay? So the shit's still hitting the fan. Now, in terms of how Iran perceives this, they're getting ready for this pending Israeli strike, and they say that we have intelligence from reliable sources that Israel is planning a major attack on our nuclear sites. We are fully prepared, and any Israeli aggression will be met with a harsh and decisive response. From the Israeli point of view, they're trying to what they call mow the lawn. They're trying to stymie and slow the progress of Iran's nuclear program. They're not going to be able to get to the bunkers. There's not a chance in hell that they're going to be able to get through 500 meters of granite, even with the help of the United States, arguably. But what they could do is attack some of their surface facilities, maybe at least claim to have successfully destroyed or neutralized some of Iranians' missile defense, thus making them more vulnerable to a real attack. But I was talking with Jamal Thomas today. Interview will release tomorrow. An excellent podcaster, by the way. You guys got to check out Jamal Thomas's channel. If you want divergent perspectives, you're going to get it on that channel, okay? I was talking to him about one of the risks if the United States or Israel decides to fly an F-35 or a B-2 bomber, or maybe even an older plane like F-18, F-15, what's that, the variant of the F-15 that can carry more and stuff, the F-16. The risk is that a near peer, somebody you don't even refer to as a peer, somebody you said, Trump officially stated that it would be, he didn't say it would be a walk in the park, but it would be the biggest, baddest, superlative explosions and shock and awe times 10, right? And that they'd be able to completely gut and decimate's probably not even a sufficient term, but destroy the Iranian regime with one fell swoop, which of course they're still struggling with Yemen, so I find that to be very hard to believe. But if an F-35 was shot down, the question is, would they even admit to it, okay, unless the Iranians could provide proof. But if they were to shoot one down, could you imagine the emperor has no clothes type fiasco that would be? If you're China and you're Russia and little old Iran, who a lot of people are underestimating, in my personal opinion, can shoot down the biggest, baddest ever, then it's game on. In the Indo-Pacific, China gets the green light. These guys are a paper tiger. The emperor has no clothes. And you got a green light for Taiwan. And hell, why not go for the rest of the Ukraine while we're at it? Because we know that our proxy, essentially, Iran, I shouldn't say proxy, but they're using a lot of white-labeled Chinese tech and Russian tech as well, can defeat these guys, even if they just shoot down one, okay? That's going to be a big, big story when it happens. Because, of course, they've never faced a peer. The U.S. and Israel have never had a fair fight in their life, with the exception of the F-16s that are being shot down over Ukraine right now. I believe at least two have been confirmed to have been shot down. And that's why they were so reluctant. It's not because they don't have them. It's because they don't want them shot down and they don't want to be exposed. Israel continues amassing weapons at a breakneck pace. Just plane load after plane load. Guys, they're preparing for something. Whether or not this something is going to be Iran, or whether they're just, the whole Iran thing is a ruse and they're really fixated on Lebanon and Syria, who knows? It would make sense that they would want to get Lebanon under complete control first, lift the travel advisory, bring the U.S. Embassy back into operation there first. It's in operation, but it's one of the biggest ones in the region. And of course, there's been all kinds of level 4 travel advisories since the war began. Get that locked down, finish the Houthis, then proceed with Iran. But you just never know, because, things are happening on a whim nowadays. What's next? There's going to be more talks later this week. I believe this Saturday, or is it Wednesday, in Muscat in Oman. I think that's in Oman. So that's what's going on. According to Reuters, Israel has not ruled out a full-scale or limited strike against Iran's nuclear facilities in the coming months, despite U.S. President Trump telling that Netanyahu that the United States would not support or aid in such a strike. Again, these guys are in cahoots. I can't believe anything Trump says at this point. I can't. If you want to, do so at your own peril. I'm just going to keep on gardening. Now, let's pivot to Europe. How much time do I have left on the clock? About 24%. Okay, now Ukraine is buying nuclear medication from Israel. Make of this what you will. It's just another reality. They're getting ready for a CBRN incident in Ukraine. And there's a lot of fake news circulating. It's not even really fake news. It's just fantastical news that somehow the Russians are going to agree to U.S. troops being present at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which will be deemed neutral by the IAEA and overseen by U.S. troops in that region. It's not going to happen, okay? These things are doomed to fail. It's quite possible that this is the week where Trump and Vance and Kellogg and Walz and Rubio finally really start to formally break away in that capacity. Now, I don't think they're going to completely, because I think if they were going to, they would have already. There is something binding them to that situation. I've speculated about how the Middle East is a petrodollar issue, whereas Ukraine and NATO are global reserve currency, arguably U.S. Treasury issue, which I would say in many ways supersedes the petrodollar, the idea that were you to relent in your support for Europe, all sort of things can start to break down in the global financial order. And so you have to maintain some kind of foothold within that region before other countries lose confidence. So they can't just, bounce, because then Taiwan's going to be like, maybe we should start negotiating with the Chinese, right? And maybe everybody else who is on the fence about aligning themselves with the United States interests might second guess that potential alliance, right? So Ukraine is buying radiation medicine from Israel in case of a nuclear threat. According to the Times of Israel, the Israeli company Pluri has signed a contract with Ukraine's Cord Blood Bank to supply PLX-R18, a drug used to treat radiation sickness. Recall that the U.S., I reported, I think it was about a year and a half ago, was stockpiling an acute radiation sickness medications, of course, likely for continuity of government purposes and for the military that they're going to use to police you, because of course they have no preparedness plan and have not encouraged people to plant victory gardens, which would be so incredibly easy to do. But again, it would come at the cost of spooking the markets, and you don't want to rock the ship when it's sinking, I suppose. The medication stimulates the production of platelets. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I always do with medical terminology, as well as white and red blood cells, which are typically damaged during radiation exposure. Under the agreement, Pluri will deliver 12,000 doses to Ukraine, enough to treat 6,000 people. The medicine will be stored in the Cord Blood Bank and distributed to hospitals across the country as needed. Now, 6,000 doses is nothing. So either they're just talking about a Chernobyl-like localized event, because they're certainly not talking about a full-blown nuclear war with 6,000 doses. The UK intercepted Russian warplanes. Royal Air Force fighter jets were scrambled twice in 48 hours to defend NATO airspace from Russian warplanes, allegedly. And there's a lot of warplane activity currently in the Black Sea with the French and UK Typhoon fighter jets that's just become normalized now. A couple of years ago, had I told you that the Russians and the French and the UK were at loggerheads in that part of the world, then that would be seen as a major escalatory red flag. Unfortunately, now we're just acclimatized to that. The other major story today, before I forget, there was a Swedish Saab 340 early warning and control airborne station that flew around Lviv. Okay, so it was actually airborne in the no-fly zone in Ukraine, which is rare unto itself. That the Russians didn't shot it down, or perhaps weren't able to shoot it down, which seems like they would most definitely have equipment that could reach that range. But this was present on the flight radar system. So this was different. I don't think I've ever seen, and in fact, I think it was so popular that Flight Radar sent out a tweet saying that it was the most popular tracked flight at that time. So this early warning system will also enable Ukraine to do deeper strikes into Russia, especially if the United States relents in its satellite-based support, and if they basically take Alex Karp off the case with Palantir and no longer providing the Ukrainians with data. If you guys want to go and watch a video I released on the weekend, what was that thing called? Some contraption I tested out. It was like this exoskeleton. Really cool stuff. It actually worked. I was blown away by the performance of the thing. We also released an interview with, what was his name again? I'm getting my names all confused. But it was like a 2-hour-long interview all about societal collapse. And oh boy, I feel bad not remembering their name. It's just every day is blending into the next. And I'm getting the homestead all done for spring. And then we also released a video about astronaut food preservation, freeze drying. So we do a lot of stuff on the channel, man. This is the Prepper TV channel. That's pretty much what it is, general. Unfortunately, I'm the host of everything. I'd like to not be the host, which is why I bring on so many guests. But we're trying to give you guys as much information as is possible, both practical and theoretical. Russia has threatened to bomb Frederick Murr's house, or at least a Russian official has, I should say, a more hawkish one clearly, should they provide Ukraine with Taurus missiles for the stated purpose of bombing the Crimean Bridge. Yep, that's what's going down. European countries, including Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, are forming an independent military bloc, independent of NATO. They're still going to be in NATO, but strengthening their cooperation in the matter of their own security against the backdrop of possible withdrawal of the United States from Europe. And of course, Finland, I believe they have one of the biggest armies in Europe, don't they? For such a small country. Is it Finland? Okay, it's one of those Norwegian countries. And they are dug in deep. I mean, this is a country that is preparing. They're like the Israel of the North in all the bunkers that they have and all of the equipment that they're amassing along Russia's border. And of course, they have a history as well. So things are ratcheting up in that respect. Britain is ramping up its weapons manufacturing. Britain is set to significantly increase its weapons protection in order to no longer rely on importing that from the US and France. This comes as British and European defense companies move away from buying US-made weaponry and equipment due to concerns over Trump making the country an unreliable military partner. In Asia, China continues to buy a record amount of Malaysian oil, which is really just Iranian oil. They do it through the Malaysian proxy. Also, China is threatening other countries who align with the United States with sanctions or retaliatory tariffs of their own should they align themselves with the United States. So we're seeing the bifurcation of the planet right down the middle between East and West, and it starts with China and the United States. China's state funds retreat from U.S. equity firms. So not only are they talking about delisting companies off the New York Stock Exchange, but Chinese state-backed funds, including China's Investment Corporation, a major corporation in China, are halting new investments in the U.S. under government pressure. So this is it. Snip. They're cutting the cord. And the U.S. drills in the Indo-Pacific are getting quite extreme. For example, in the Philippines, the U.S. is simulating full-scale battle in the South China Sea with, get this, 17,000 troops. Okay? Have you seen the size of China's fleet lately? That's just the fleet. That's not counting the missiles that they can launch from land and hit that place. Anyways, this is one of the biggest, their biggest joint military drill yet, kicked off in Balikatan. And they're making unprecedented military moves. The U.S. Marine Corps is deploying Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, also known as Nemesis, armed with naval strike missiles into the heart of one of the most strategic intense bodies of water in the world, the Luzon Strait. I believe this is south of Taiwan. It'll be the closest to the Chinese mainland the U.S. land-based cruise missiles have been deployed. So things are moving into position in that theater as well. We've also seen increased American surveillance aircraft aviational activity, which has been flooding into the airspace, possibly as a precursor to these exercises that are currently ongoing. And China decided to test a non-nuclear hydrogen bomb that apparently generates a fireball of 1,000 degrees Celsius, lasting 15 times longer than TNT, according to a new science paper that was revealed. The key component is magnesium hydride, originally intended for clean energy as its core explosive material. So, that's what's going down. Keep on prepping. The best thing you can do at this point in time is go and watch our Blue Strip videos. We have copious amounts of stuff on prepping on a budget. You don't need a freeze dryer to preserve food. In fact, the simplest solution is just go to a wholesale food store, even a Costco. I mean, sometimes Costco has good deals, but here it's called I believe it's called the wholesale food store. And just buy some staples. Stock up on staple grains. I mean, I wish I would have known that when I was a starving student, that I could go and buy a 40-pound bag of rice, which was probably saving me 10x what it would cost me at the grocery store. Buy stuff in bulk, and if you can't buy it all at once, then just buy one thing in bulk every time, and that will last you a long, long time, okay? I only suspect that things are going to get worse, and it appears as though I was going to make the video about this yesterday, but we could very well see the end of our gun rights here in Canada because they're going to vote for that idiot. They're actually going to do it. And you guys know I'm not a political channel, but I've made an exception with this election because Canadian firearms rights are riding on who gets elected. Now, despite the fact that I don't agree with Pierre on everything, he's the only guy who's claimed to repeal these atrocious infringements on whatever sort of rights and freedoms we have. I realize that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a farce. This order in council, which was handed down by the Governor General, who of course speaks on behalf of the British monarchy, decided that they would allow the RCMP to unilaterally, which is our Royal Canadian Mounted Police, I guess they're like our FBI sort of, to prohibit whichever firearms they chose. And of course, they're prohibiting anything and anything that looks scary, even hunting rifles, okay? Why? Because they're trying to make the argument that this is for the purpose of bringing down gun crime, which it's been statistically, scientifically demonstrated that it most certainly does not. And unfortunately, the CCFR, who recently had a court case with the Supreme Court protesting this, failed. And that's basically it. So the only chance we have is a political one. We can no longer litigate, so we must legislate. And all we can hope for is that Pierre gets in, there's some abrogation, and we can roll back some of these absolutely absurd laws that penalize people who do nothing but follow the rules and pay for the taxes, pay for the wages of the people who are imposing these ridiculous laws. So go out and vote. Go out and vote, even if you don't think it's going to count. Because if you don't, then, why would anybody else, right? So I'm going to do my best this week to remind people, and I'm going to put it at the front end of the videos that I release, that you need to get out there. And early voting, I believe, was the last day was today. You still have next Monday. Make sure you go and do that. And even if you're a person who's on the fence about guns, ask yourself, I mean, what sane person would want less rights and not more? I mean, your primary right is for self-defense. If they can convince you that you shouldn't be able to defend yourself, and we're not even saying for gun rights in Canada, we're talking about sport shooting, and it's typically framed as sport shooting and hunting. But why is it taboo to want to defend yourself? Within a reasonable limits. What do they call it? Like proportional. What is it called? If you feel that you're under threat of grievous bodily harm, then you can defend yourself with a firearm in Canada. Why? Obviously, nobody wants to take the life of somebody else. Nobody wants to have to shoot somebody. But why should it be taboo to... You got to ask yourself, why would the government not want you to defend yourself? Could it be that they have a plan for you and they don't want you to defend yourself against them and their bullshit? Even if it isn't, hurting us all to camp someday, maybe it's something slightly toned down but still oppressive. If they can get rid of that survival instinct and convince you that anybody who wants that survival instinct is evil and is out to get you. I mean, think about the insanity of that. The government and the politicians who, this is a market cornered by the left right now. Again, I try to be as politically sympathetic as anybody. They want you to believe that other people are the threat, these just independent people, and not them who have a monopoly over firearms. And they want you to convince you that they're the ones to be trusted. Now, even if you are of the liberal persuasion, progressive persuasion, you got to ask yourself, what happens if and when the conservatives get in someday and, the Fourth Reich or whatever it is you fear emerges and all the guns have been taken? How are you going to defend yourself, right? So this works both ways. The idea that the government is not going to interchange at some point and will not be replaced by your opposition is foolish. So you should want to preserve as much rights and freedoms as you can. Now, I'm not saying, there's going to be some taking up of arms against the government. Nothing like that, of course. But, I mean, that's part of the reason why they have the Constitution of the United States, which, of course, here is frowned on, right? I'm just talking with respect to the ability of an individual to value their own life enough to defend themselves and not to have to offload that responsibility onto the grid. That's what they want you to do. Offload everything on to the incompetent police. And that's not a slight against all police. It's just saying if you live in a rural environment, the police is going to take them a half an hour to get there. Okay, so whatever problem you're dealing with you are dealing with by yourself. They want you to offload the responsibility to the education system that is failing in every possible way. The education system across Canada and the United States is absolutely appalling. It's abysmal. It needs a complete overhaul. Okay? They want you to offload all your food. Ask yourself, if food is so damn expensive, why wouldn't the government just come out and say, hey, we're going to have a free seeds initiative. Seeds! Dirt cheap. Plant a garden in your backyard. Why wouldn't they say that? Why don't they want you to be self-reliant? Why do they have these crack pipe machines in parts of BC where you can go and get like a kit and they'll give you a place to go and do your stuff? You got to wonder why. And there was a quote, what was it in that movie? I believe it was 1923. It wasn't a movie, it was a show. And one of the Aboriginal guys, here we call them First Nations people, said in the movie, he said, the government needs you to need them. So they need to make sure that there's problems, right? Because if there wasn't problems, then you wouldn't need the government. So they need to make you, distanced from all the things that can actually be solutions to those problems so they never get fixed. Anyways, I'm going on a rant. I give you more than you bargained for. By the time I end this video, gold is either crashed below 3,300 or it's above 35. Either way, it's a sign that the system is breaking. Keep on prepping, my friends, because people are going to be looking to you for guidance when the reality sinks in and when they transcend depression and accept their fate. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.